The sun had barely crested over the San Juan Mountains when Rosa Remington walked through the ranch gates disguised as a man, her thick chestnut braid coiled tight against her scalp beneath a weathered hat. And she knew that if anyone discovered her secret before she earned enough money to buy back her family's land, everything would be lost. It was the summer of 1882, and Ouray, Colorado sat nestled in a box canyon surrounded by towering peaks that turned purple at sunset. The mining town had grown rapidly over the past decade, bringing with it cattle ranches that supplied beef to the hungry miners. The Double V Ranch was one of the largest, sprawling across thousands of acres of high country meadows and pine forests. Rosa had heard they were hiring hands for the summer drive, and she had been desperate enough to take the risk. She gave her name as Roy Remington when the ranch foreman, a grizzled man named Bill Tucker, looked her up and down with skeptical eyes. She had bound her chest with strips of cloth until she could barely breathe, wore her dead father's clothes that hung loose enough to hide her shape, and kept her voice low and rough. Tucker had shrugged and told her to report to the bunkhouse, and just like that, Rosa had become Roy. The bunkhouse smelled of sweat, tobacco, and leather. A dozen bunks lined the walls, most already claimed by ranch hands who had been there since spring. Rosa chose one in the corner, as far from the others as possible, and dropped her bedroll onto the thin mattress. Her hands were shaking, but she kept them steady as she unpacked her few belongings. "You the new hand." Rosa turned to find a man standing in the doorway, backlit by the morning sun. He was tall, well over 6 feet, with shoulders broad enough to fill the frame. As he stepped inside, she could see his face clearly. Strong jaw, sharp cheekbones, eyes the color of storm clouds. He looked to be in his mid-20s, perhaps 3 or 4 years older than her own 21 years. Something about the way he moved, with an easy confidence that came from years in the saddle, made her heart skip. "That's right," Rosa said, keeping her voice gruff. "Roy Remington." The man walked closer, extending a hand. "Zachariah Vance. Folks call me Zach. I run the string of horses we use for the drives." His hand engulfed hers when they shook, calloused and strong. Rosa made sure to grip firmly, the way men did, though her palm felt small against his. His gray eyes studied her face for a moment longer than comfortable, and she fought the urge to look away. "You done ranch work before?" Zach asked, his voice a low rumble that seemed to resonate in her chest. "Some," Rosa lied. She had grown up on a small homestead, had ridden horses and mended fences and done all manner of farm work, but nothing on the scale of a cattle ranch. "Looking to learn more?" Zach nodded slowly. "Well, you picked a good time. We are moving 2,000 head up to the high pastures next week. You will learn plenty." He paused, then added, "Get settled. Tucker wants everyone at the corral in an hour for assignments." He left as quietly as he had come, and Rosa released a breath she had not known she was holding. Her fingers went unconsciously to her hat, pressing it more firmly onto her head. The braid beneath it felt like a coiled snake, dangerous and ready to strike. The next hours passed in a blur of names and faces and instructions. Tucker assigned her to work with the remuda, the string of spare horses, under Zach's supervision. It was good work, Rosa thought, better than mucking stables or riding fence. It would keep her close to the animals and away from situations where her secret might be exposed. That first day, she learned that Zach Vance was a man of few words but much skill. He could gentle a half-wild Mustang with nothing but patience and a soft voice, could read a horse's mood from the flick of an ear. He showed Rosa how to check hooves for stones, how to fit a bridle properly, how to spot signs of colic or injury. She watched his hands as he worked, noting how gentle they were despite their size and strength. By evening, every muscle in Rosa's body ached. She had lifted saddles that seemed to weigh as much as she did, hauled water buckets, and spent hours in the corral working with the horses. When the dinner bell rang, she almost wept with relief. The ranch hands ate in a long dining hall attached to the main house. The cook, a Chinese man named Mr. Chen, served up platters of beef, beans, and fresh bread that Rosa devoured without tasting. She sat at the end of one of the long tables, keeping her head down and her hat on. A few of the other hands tried to make conversation, asking where she was from and what brought her to our ray, but she gave short answers and they eventually left her alone, all except Zach. He sat across from her, eating methodically while his eyes occasionally flickered in her direction. Rosa tried not to notice, tried to focus on her food, but she could feel the weight of his gaze like a physical thing. After dinner, she retreated to the bunkhouse and claimed the corner bunk for her own. She waited until the other hands were occupied with cards and whiskey before changing quickly into a nightshirt, keeping her back to the room. The binding around her chest had left red marks on her ribs, and she longed to remove it, but that would have to wait until she could find true privacy. That night, lying in the darkness listening to the snores and shuffles of a dozen sleeping men, Rosa wondered if she had made a terrible mistake. But then she thought of her mother's grave, fresh turned earth on a hill overlooking the valley. She thought of the land her father had homesteaded, now owned by a banker in Denver who had foreclosed after her father's death. She thought of her younger brother, sent to live with an aunt in Kansas because Rosa could not afford to keep him, and she knew she had no choice but to see this through. The second day dawned clear and cool, the way summer mornings did at 8,000 feet. Rosa woke before the others, her body sore but determined. She splashed water on her face from the basin outside, being careful not to remove her hat even for a moment. The braid beneath it had loosened slightly during the night, and she took a few precious seconds to tuck the stray hairs back into place. When she turned, she found Zach standing a few feet away, watching her with those storm-gray eyes. Rosa's heart stopped. How long had he been there? What had he seen? Morning, Zach said, his voice neutral. Morning, Rosa managed, her throat tight. He walked past her to the water basin, and she thought perhaps she had imagined the intensity of his stare. But as she headed toward the dining hall, she could feel his eyes on her back, and a chill ran down her spine that had nothing to do with the mountain air. Breakfast was quick and quiet. Afterward, Tucker gathered the hands to discuss the upcoming cattle drive. They would begin moving the herd in 5 days, he announced, and everyone needed to be ready for 2 weeks of hard riding through rough country. Rosa listened carefully, trying to commit every detail to memory. When Tucker dismissed them to their assignments, Zach caught her elbow gently. "Roy, I need you to help me move some horses to the north pasture today. Just the 2 of us." Rosa nodded, not trusting her voice. Being alone with Zach both thrilled and terrified her in equal measure. They saddled their mounts in silence. Zach rode a big bay gelding named Thunder, while Rosa was given a smaller paint mare called Daisy. The horses they were moving, a dozen young geldings, milled in the corral waiting to be driven out. The ride to the north pasture took them through stands of aspen and pine, across meadows thick with wildflowers. The mountains loomed on all sides, their peaks still crowned with snow despite the summer heat in the valleys below. Rosa had lived her whole life in Colorado, but she had never seen country quite like this. It took her breath away. "Beautiful, is it not?" Zach said, the first words he had spoken since they left the ranch. "It is," Rosa agreed, forgetting to roughen her voice for a moment. Zach glanced at her sharply, but said nothing. They rode on, The only sounds the creak of saddle leather and the soft thuds of hooves on pine needles. When they reached the north pasture, a wide expanse of grass bordered by a split-rail fence, Zach dismounted and opened the gate. Rosa helped him drive the young horses through, then close it behind them. The geldings immediately spread out to graze, tails swishing contentedly. Zach leaned against the fence, one boot propped on the lower rail, his eyes on the distant mountains. Rosa stood a few feet away, unsure whether to stay or go. "You can take your hat off if you want," Zach said quietly. "No one here but us and the horses." Rosa's hand flew to her hat, pressing it down. "I am fine. Suit yourself." Zach pulled a tobacco pouch from his pocket and began rolling a cigarette with practiced ease. "But it is hot today. You will get heat stroke keeping your head covered like that." "I said I am fine," Rosa repeated, more sharply than she intended. Zach lit his cigarette and took a long drag, exhaling smoke through his nose. "You know, Roy, you do not have to be afraid of me." "I am not afraid," Rosa lied. "Good." He turned to face her fully, and the look in his eyes made her breath catch. "Because I know." The world seemed to tilt. Rosa gripped the fence rail to steady herself. "Know what?" "That you are not a man," Zach said simply. "I have known since yesterday morning when I first saw you in the bunkhouse. Probably knew before that, if I am being honest. The way you stand, the way you move, the size of your hands. A dozen little things that do not quite add up." Rosa felt the blood drain from her face, her vision tunneled, and for a moment she thought she might faint. "I do not know what you are talking about." "Yes, you do." Zach's voice was gentle, not accusatory. "Your secret is safe with me. I have not told anyone, and I will not. But I figure you deserve to know that I know, so you are not jumping at shadows the whole time." She stared at him, her mind racing. This was it then. Her plan was ruined. She would be sent away, back to town with nothing, and her brother would remain with their aunt, and her family's land would stay in the banker's hands, and her mother's sacrifice would have been for nothing. "Please," she whispered, and her real voice emerged, soft and desperate. "Please do not tell Tucker. I need this job. I need the money. I can work just as hard as any man here, I swear it. Just give me a chance." Zach studied her for a long moment, then nodded. "I already told you your secret is safe. I meant it." He took another drag of his cigarette. "But I would like to know your real name. Cannot keep calling you Roy when it is just the two of us." "Rosa," she said quietly. "Rosa Remington. Rosa." The way he said her name, soft and careful like he was tasting something precious, made her shiver despite the warm sun. "That suits you better than Roy." They stood in silence for a while, watching the horses graze. Rosa's heart was still pounding, but the panic was beginning to recede. He knew, and he was not going to tell. She did not understand why, did not understand what he could possibly gain from keeping her secret, but she was grateful beyond words. "Can I ask why?" Zach said eventually. "Why you are doing this?" Rosa took a deep breath, then told him. About her father's death 2 years ago, kicked by a horse he was trying to break. About the mounting debts she had not known existed until after the funeral. About the banker who had foreclosed on their homestead, taking everything her family had built. About her mother, who had worked herself to death trying to keep them afloat, passing just 3 months ago. About her 12-year-old brother Timothy, sent to live with relatives because Rosa could not afford to keep him. "I need $500, she said, the number feeling enormous as she spoke it. "That is what the banker will take to sell me back the land. I can make maybe $30 a month working as a ranch hand through the summer. As a woman, doing laundry or cooking, I would make half that. I cannot afford to wait twice as long." Zach listened without interrupting, his expression unreadable. When she finished, he ground out his cigarette under his boot heel and turned to her. $500 is a lot of money, he said, but it is not impossible. If you work the full summer season here, then hire on for autumn roundup somewhere else, you might make it by spring. That is the plan, Rosa said, or it was before you figured me out. Like I said, your secret is safe. Zach pushed off from the fence. But we should probably head back before Tucker sends someone looking for us. They mounted up and rode back to the ranch in companionable silence. Rosa's mind was whirling with everything that had happened, but beneath the fear and uncertainty, there was something else. A warmth in her chest when she looked at Zach's broad back ahead of her on the trail. A flutter in her stomach when she remembered the way he had said her name. She told herself firmly that she could not afford such feelings. She was here to work, to earn money, to reclaim her family's future. Romance was a luxury she could not indulge, especially not with a man who held her secret in his hands. But her heart, it seemed, had other ideas. Over the next few days, a strange routine developed. In front of the other ranch hands, Zach treated Rosa exactly like any other worker, giving her orders and corrections as needed. But when they were alone, which happened more often than Rosa had expected, he called her Rosa and spoke to her as an equal. He taught her things about ranching, about horses, about surviving in the high country. And slowly, carefully, they began to learn each other. Rosa discovered that Zach had been orphaned young, raised by an uncle who ran a cattle ranch in Wyoming. He had learned everything he knew about horses from a Shoshone man who worked on that ranch, a man he still spoke of with deep respect. He had come to Colorado 3 years ago, looking for new country and new opportunities. He was 26 years old, had never been married, and had a quiet sense of humor that surprised her with its cleverness. Zach learned that Rosa could ride better than half the men on the ranch, that she had a way with animals that came from genuine affection rather than dominance, and that she was far stronger than her small frame suggested. He learned that she loved the mountains, that she had taught herself to read from her mother's Bible, and that she sang sometimes when she thought no one was listening, soft songs in Spanish that her grandmother had taught her. The other ranch hands seemed to accept Rosa Remington well enough. A few of the older ones called her Kid and gave her advice. A few of the younger ones tried to befriend her, and she had to carefully maintain her distance without seeming unfriendly. And through it all, Zach was there, a steady presence that made her feel both safer and more vulnerable than she had ever felt before. The day before the cattle drive began, Tucker gathered everyone for a final briefing. They would be moving 2,000 head through rough country, up to the high meadows where the cattle would graze for the summer. It would take 10 days if all went well, longer if they hit bad weather or trouble. Every man would need to pull his weight. Rosa listened intently, aware of Zach standing a few feet away. When Tucker dismissed them to prepare their gear, she headed to the tack room to check her saddle and bedroll. She was so focused on her task that she did not hear someone approach until a hand grabbed her shoulder and spun her around. It was Frank Morrison, one of the younger ranch hands. He was maybe 19, with the kind of cocky attitude that came from not yet having life knock it out of him. He had tried several times to befriend Roy, and Rosa had politely rebuffed him each time. "Hey, Roy," Frank said, standing too close. "Some of us are going into town tonight for a drink before the drive. You should come." "No, thank you," Rosa said, trying to step back. Frank's hand was still on her shoulder, his grip uncomfortably tight. "Come on, do not be unfriendly. You have been here almost a week and you barely talk to anyone. What, you think you are better than us?" "I do not think that at all. I just prefer my own company." "Well, that is not very neighborly," Frank said, his voice taking on an edge. "Around here we look out for each other. Be part of the crew." "Let him go, Frank." Both of them turned to find Zach in the doorway of the tack room. His voice had been quiet, but there was steel underneath it. Frank dropped his hand from Rosa's shoulder but did not back down. "Just trying to be friendly, Zach. No harm in that." Roy said no. "That is the end of it." Zach stepped into the room, and somehow he seemed to fill all the available space. "You should get back to your own preparations." For a moment, Frank looked like he might argue. Then he shrugged and walked past Zach with a muttered curse. When he was gone, Rosa released a shaky breath. "Thank you," she said quietly. "You need to be more careful," Zach said, his expression serious. "Frank is harmless enough, but some of the other hands might not be. And if they get too curious about why you are so standoffish, they might start looking closer." "I know. I am trying to find the balance between friendly and distant. It is harder than I thought." Zach's expression softened. "Just stay close to me during the drive. I will make sure nobody bothers you." The cattle drive began at dawn on a Tuesday morning that promised heat later, but started cool and pleasant. Rosa rode a sturdy buckskin gelding named Copper, chosen by Zach for his calm temperament and sure feet. Her job was to help manage the remuda, keeping the spare horses moving with the main herd and swapping out mounts for the drovers as needed. The first day was chaos. 2,000 head of cattle, each with its own stubborn mind, strung out over a mile of trail. Dust rose in choking clouds. Calves bawled for their mothers. Steers tried to break from the herd, and the cowboys rode hard to turn them back. Rosa worked alongside Zach and 2 other men, keeping the horses bunched and moving. By the time they made camp that first night, Rosa was covered in dust and sweat, her body aching in places she had not known could ache. But she had done her job, and done it well. Tucker had even given her an approving nod when she helped get the horses settled for the night. The drovers ate around the campfire, tin plates piled with beans and salt pork. Rosa sat a little apart, too tired to be hungry, watching the stars emerge in the darkening sky. The mountains loomed black against the purple twilight, and somewhere in the distance a coyote howled. Zach dropped down beside her, his own plate in hand. "You did good today," he said quietly. "I am exhausted," Rosa admitted. "It gets easier. Your body will adjust." He ate a few bites, then asked, "How is your disguise holding up?" Rosa touched her hat automatically. "Fine, I think." "The dust helps. Hard to see much of anything through all that dirt." "True enough." Zach finished his food and set the plate aside. "We will be crossing the Cimarron River tomorrow. It is running high this time of year with snowmelt. You are a strong swimmer." "Yes, strong enough." "Good. Stay near me during the crossing. The current can be tricky." They sat in comfortable silence, listening to the sounds of the camp settling for the night. Rosa was acutely aware of Zach's presence beside her, the warmth of his shoulder nearly touching hers. She told herself it was just gratitude she felt, appreciation for his protection and kindness. But she knew it was more than that. She had never felt this way about anyone before, this pull that seemed to draw her toward him like iron to a lodestone. "Rosa," Zach said softly, and she turned to find him looking at her with an expression she could not quite read. "I want you to know that you can trust me, no matter what happens." "I know," she said, and realized it was true. She did trust him, with her secret and perhaps with more than that. He held her gaze for a long moment, and she thought he might say something else. But then one of the other drovers called out to him, and the moment was broken. The river crossing the next day was everything Zach had warned and more. The Cimarron ran swift and cold, swollen with spring melt from the high peaks. The cattle balked at the water's edge, and it took an hour of hard work to get the lead steers into the current. Once they went, the rest followed, but the crossing was chaotic and dangerous. Rosa rode Copper into the water, feeling the shock of cold as it rose past her stirrups. then her knees, then her waist. The buckskin swam strongly, but the current was powerful, pushing them downstream. Around her, cattle thrashed and bellowed, and the air was full of shouts from the drovers. She lost sight of Zach in the confusion and felt a moment of panic. Then, Copper's hooves found purchase on the far bank, and she was riding up out of the water, dripping and gasping but safe. She turned to count the horses, making sure they had all made it across. They were too short. "Zach," she called, scanning the river. She spotted him midstream, his bay gelding Thunder swimming strongly. But behind him, two of the remuda horses were being swept downstream, eyes rolling white with fear. Without thinking, Rosa turned Copper and plunged back into the river. The gelding hesitated only a second before obeying, swimming hard against the current. Rosa rode downstream, angling to intercept the panicking horses. She got close enough to grab the lead rope of one, a young sorrel mare, and turned Copper back toward the bank. The current fought her every foot of the way. Her arms burned with the effort of holding the rope, and water kept splashing into her face, blinding her. But Copper was strong and determined, and slowly they made progress. When the sorrel's hooves hit solid ground, Rosa nearly wept with relief. The second horse, a gray gelding, had managed to swim to a sandbar in the middle of the river. Zach was already riding toward it, Thunder cutting through the current with powerful strokes. Rosa watched as Zach reached the gelding, got a rope on it, and towed it back to the herd. When they finally had all the animals accounted for on the far bank, Tucker rode over to Rosa, his weathered face split in a rare grin. "Good work, kid. That was some fine riding." Rosa nodded, too breathless to speak. Her hat had stayed miraculously in place, though her clothes were soaked through. She was suddenly aware of the binding around her chest, visible through the wet fabric of her shirt. She crossed her arms casually and turned away before anyone could notice. Zach appeared at her side, also dripping. "That was either very brave or very foolish," he said, his voice tight with an emotion she could not name. "The horses would have drowned. And you could have drowned with them." He grabbed her elbow, his grip almost painful. "Do not risk yourself like that again. Not for horses, not for cattle, not for anything." Rosa stared at him, surprised by the intensity in his voice. "They are valuable animals, I thought." "I do not care about the value," Zach said roughly. "I care about you not getting yourself killed." He released her abruptly and rode away to help with the herd, leaving Rosa standing alone, her heart pounding. The way he had looked at her, the fear and anger and something else in his eyes, made her realize that maybe, just maybe, he felt the same pull she did. The cattle drive continued through days that blurred together in a haze of dust, heat, and exhaustion. They climbed higher into the mountains, following old game trails through pine forests and across alpine meadows carpeted with wildflowers. The air grew thinner, and Rosa found herself breathing hard during the steep climbs. But the country was so beautiful it made her chest ache with something that had nothing to do with altitude. She and Zach developed an easy partnership, working together to manage the remuda with few words needed. They had a rhythm now, an understanding of how each other moved and thought. The other drovers noticed and started assigning them tasks together as a matter of course. On the 6th night of the drive, they camped beside a high mountain lake, so clear Rosa could see trout swimming in its depths. After dinner, she walked down to the water's edge, needing a few minutes away from the noise and smell of the camp. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink and purple that reflected on the lake's still surface. She heard footsteps behind her and knew without turning that it was Zach. "Beautiful, is it not?" he said, echoing his words from that day in the north pasture. "It is," Rosa agreed. I have never seen anything like this. This is my favorite part of the drive every year. This lake, these mountains, reminds me that there is more to life than cattle and dust." Rosa glanced at him. In the fading light, his features were softened, the hard edges gentled. "Do you ever want to do something different, not be a ranch hand?" Zach considered the question. "Sometimes. I think about having my own place, a small spread where I could raise horses. Not cattle, just horses. But land is expensive, and I have been saving for years without getting much closer." He paused, then added quietly, "What about you? After you get your family's land back, what then?" "I will bring Timothy home," Rosa said immediately. "Build up the homestead again, maybe plant crops, raise some chickens, just enough to live on." She hesitated, then admitted, "I think about having a family someday, a husband, children, but that seems like a dream from another life now." "Why?" "Because what man would want a woman who spent a summer pretending to be a man? Who can rope and ride better than most cowboys? Who is not soft or delicate or any of the things women are supposed to be?" Zach was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "The right man would not care about any of that. The right man would see how strong you are, how brave, how determined. He would admire those things, not condemn them." Rosa's throat felt tight. "Do you think such a man exists?" "I know he does." Zach's voice was low and rough, and when Rosa looked up at him, the expression in his eyes took her breath away. "Zach," she whispered, not sure what she was asking. He reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away, and touched her cheek with his calloused fingertips. "Rosa, I have been trying not to say this, trying to keep things professional, but I cannot anymore. You are the most remarkable woman I have ever met, and pretending I do not feel anything is killing me." Her heart was pounding so hard she thought it might burst from her chest. "We barely know each other. I know enough. I know you would risk your life to save a horse. I know you work harder than any two men combined. I know you sing in Spanish when you are happy, and that you touch your hat when you are nervous, and that you have the kindest heart of anyone I have ever known. Zach, I cannot. This job I need to focus on. I know," he said gently. "I know you have goals, responsibilities. I am not asking you to give those up. I am just asking you to know how I feel. What happens with that is up to you." He dropped his hand and stepped back, and Rosa felt the loss of his touch like a physical ache. Part of her wanted to throw caution aside, to step into his arms and let herself feel everything she had been holding back. But the practical part, the part that had kept her alive and moving forward through grief and loss, held her in place. "I need to think," she said finally. "Take all the time you need. I will be here." They walked back to camp in silence, but it was different now, charged with possibility and promise. That night, lying in her bedroll under a ceiling of stars, Rosa could not sleep. Her mind kept replaying the moment by the lake, the feel of Zach's hand on her face, the look in his eyes. She had come here for one purpose: to earn money and reclaim her family's land. Romance had not been part of the plan, but life, she was learning, did not care much for plans. The drive reached the high meadows on the 10th day, and the cattle spread out across acres of grass with visible relief. Tucker assigned groups of men to set up line camps, small temporary shelters where drovers would stay to watch the herd through the summer. Rosa helped with the work, grateful for tasks that kept her hands and mind busy. That evening, Tucker called her aside. Her heart sank, thinking her secret had finally been discovered. But instead, he said, "You have done good work, Roy. Better than I expected when I hired you. How would you feel about staying on here at the high camp for the summer? We need reliable hands, and you have proven yourself." Relief flooded through her. More time on the ranch meant more money, which meant getting closer to her goal. "I would like that, sir. Thank you." Tucker nodded. "Zach will be staying too, managing the horses. You two work well together, so I figured it made sense." After Tucker walked away, Rosa allowed herself a small smile. 2 months in the high country with Zach. 2 months to figure out what these feelings meant, what she wanted beyond just reclaiming land and reuniting with her brother. The high camp was rustic but comfortable, a series of small cabins arranged around a central fire pit. Rosa was given her own tiny cabin, barely more than 4 walls and a roof, but it was more privacy than she had enjoyed since this whole adventure began. For the first time in weeks, she could remove the binding around her chest at night and sleep in comfort. The work settled into a routine. Days were spent watching the cattle, moving them between meadows, checking for injury or illness. Rosa and Zach managed the horses, and the easy partnership they had developed during the drive deepened into something more profound. They talked for hours while riding the high trails about their pasts and their dreams and everything in between. They worked side by side in companionable silence, communicating with glances and small gestures, and slowly, carefully, they grew closer. It started with small things. Zach bringing her coffee in the morning, exactly how she liked it. Rosa mending a tear in his shirt without being asked. Sitting together by the fire in the evenings, their shoulders touching. Hands brushing when passing tools or tack, contact that lasted a heartbeat longer than necessary. 3 weeks into their stay at the high camp, a summer storm rolled through. Lightning split the sky, thunder echoing off the mountain peaks like cannon fire. The cattle grew restless, and all hands were called out to keep them from stampeding. Rosa rode through the rain for hours, her clothes soaked through, her visibility reduced to a few feet by the driving water. When the storm finally passed, and the cattle had settled, she rode back to camp shivering and exhausted. Zach met her at the corral, his face tight with worry. "Are you all right?" he demanded, helping her dismount from Copper. Fine," Rosa managed through chattering teeth. "Just sea cold." Zach cursed under his breath and put his arm around her shoulders, steering her toward his cabin. "You need to get out of those wet clothes before you catch your death." His cabin was larger than hers, with a small wood stove that he quickly stoked into a roaring fire. Rosa stood dripping on the floor, too cold to care about propriety. Zach handed her a blanket and turned his back. "Change out of those wet things," he ordered. "I will not look." Rosa fumbled with the buttons of her shirt, her fingers clumsy with cold. The wet binding around her chest had become a constrictive band that made breathing difficult. She managed to peel off the soaked layers, wrapping herself in the blanket Zach had provided. "Okay," she said, her voice small. Zach turned around, and something in his expression shifted when he saw her standing there, wrapped in his blanket, her hair freed from the braid when she removed her hat falling in damp waves around her shoulders. "Rosa," he said, her name almost a prayer. He crossed the small space between them, and this time when he reached for her, she did not hesitate. She stepped into his arms, and it felt like coming home. His embrace was warm and strong, his heart beating steady against her cheek. "I have been so worried," he murmured into her hair. "When that lightning hit so close when I could not see you in the rain, I thought, I am here," Rosa whispered. "I am safe." Zach pulled back just enough to look at her face. His hand came up to cup her cheek, and this time she leaned into the touch. "Rosa, I know the timing is terrible. I know you have plans and goals and every reason to focus on those instead of this. But I have to tell you, I am in love with you. I have been for weeks now, maybe since that first day when you walked into the bunkhouse pretending to be something you are not. And I cannot keep it inside anymore." Rosa felt tears prick her eyes, but they were not tears of sadness. "Zach, I love you too. I have been trying to stay focused on why I came here, but I cannot help it. You are everything I never knew I needed." The kiss, when it came, was gentle and sweet and perfect. Zach's lips were soft against hers, his touch reverent. Rosa felt like she was drowning in sensation, in the feeling of being wanted and cherished and loved. When they finally broke apart, both were breathing hard. "We should probably talk about this," Zach said, resting his forehead against hers. "Figure out what it means, where we go from here." "Tomorrow," Rosa said. "Right now, I just want to be here with you." They sat by the fire, Rosa wrapped in the blanket and in Zach's arms, and talked until the early hours of morning. They talked about their dreams, their fears, their hopes for the future. Zach told her about his savings, the $300 he had put away toward buying his own land. Rosa told him about Timothy, about how much she missed her brother and wanted to give him a real home again. "What if," Zach said carefully, "we combined our goals, your land and my money for horses? We could build something together, Rosa, a real partnership." Rosa's heart soared at the thought, but practical concerns weighed it down. "Zach, we have known each other for barely 2 months. People will talk. And what about my reputation? If anyone finds out I spent the summer disguised as a man, then we will deal with it together," Zach said firmly. "I do not care what people say, Rosa. I care about you, and about building a life that makes us both happy. If you want to take things slow, we can do that. If you want to wait until you have your land back before we make any decisions, that is fine too. I am not going anywhere." The summer passed in a golden haze of work and stolen moments of affection. Rosa and Zach kept their relationship quiet, mindful of the other ranch hands who might not understand or approve. But in private, they were inseparable. Zach taught her to see the high country through his eyes, pointing out game trails and good places for wild berries. Rosa shared her dreams of the homestead, describing the little house her father had built and the creek that ran through the valley. As August faded into September, the time came to drive the cattle back down from the high meadows. Rosa felt a pang at leaving this place where she had been so happy, but she was also eager for the next step. The summer's wages would give her $200, a significant chunk toward her goal. The drive back to the ranch was uneventful, and Tucker praised all the hands for a successful season. When they arrived back at the Double V, he called Rosa aside. "Roy, you have been one of the best hands I have had in years," Tucker said. "I would like to offer you permanent work if you are interested, not just seasonal but year-round." Rosa's mind raced. Year-round work meant steady income, but it also meant continuing the disguise indefinitely. She glanced at Zach, who was watching from across the yard, and made her decision. "Can I think about it, sir? I have some personal matters I need to settle first. Of course. Let me know by the end of the week." That night, Rosa and Zach met by the corral away from curious eyes. "What are you going to do?" Zach asked. "I am going to tell Tucker the truth," Rosa said. "All of it, and accept whatever consequences come." Zach took her hand. "You do not have to. You could keep going as Roy, earn the money you need." "I could," Rosa agreed, "but I am tired of hiding, and if we are going to have any kind of future together, it needs to be built on honesty." The next morning, Rosa walked into Tucker's office wearing a dress she had kept hidden in her saddlebag all these months. Her hair was down, brushed and shining, and there was no mistaking her for anything but what she was. Tucker's face went through a series of expressions: shock, confusion, understanding, and finally, grudging respect. "Well," he said after a long silence, "this explains a few things, like why you never joined the boys for their trips into town. I am sorry for the deception, sir. But I needed the work, and I knew you would not hire a woman for the cattle drive. You are right, I would not have." Tucker leaned back in his chair, studying her. "The question is, what do I do now? I cannot have it getting out that I hired a woman disguised as a man. It would ruin my reputation." "I understand, sir. I will leave today if you want, but I hope you will pay me for the work I did. I did it well and I earned those wages." Tucker was quiet for a long moment, then sighed. "You did do the work well, better than most men I have hired, and I am a fair man, Rosa Remington. You will get your wages, every penny." He paused. "As for the rest, I need to think on it. Give me a few days." Rosa left the office with her heart pounding. The secret was out now, at least to Tucker. What happened next was beyond her control. Word spread through the ranch like wildfire. By evening, every hand knew that Roy Remington was actually Rosa Remington, and the reactions varied from admiration to outrage to simple confusion. A few of the men refused to speak to her, feeling betrayed by the deception. Others, like old Bill Tucker, just shook their heads and muttered about the changing times. Frank Morrison, the young cowboy who had tried to befriend Roy, cornered her near the bunkhouse. "You made fools of us all," he said angrily, "playing dress-up like it was some kind of game." "It was not a game," Rosa said quietly. "It was survival. You should be ashamed of yourself lying like that." "That is enough, Frank." Zach appeared beside Rosa, his expression hard. "She did the work same as any of us. She rode through that river crossing and saved those horses. She worked through the storm and never complained. If you have a problem with that, it is your problem, not hers." Frank glared at them both, then stalked away. Zach turned to Rosa, his expression softening. "You all right? I will be. I knew this would not be easy." 3 days later, Tucker called a meeting of all the ranch hands. Rosa stood at the front, her heart in her throat, as Tucker addressed the group. "Most of you know by now that Roy Remington is actually Rosa Remington, and that she spent the summer working under false pretenses. I have given this situation a lot of thought, and here is what I have decided." He paused, looking each man in the eye. "Rosa Remington did the work of a hand and did it well. She earned her wages fair and square. More than that, she showed courage and determination that would be admirable in anyone, regardless of what they were wearing. So while I cannot offer her ongoing work as a ranch hand, I will pay her in full for this season and give her a letter of recommendation for whatever she does next. Anyone who has a problem with that is welcome to leave." No one moved. After a moment, a few of the older hands nodded in approval. Rosa felt tears sting her eyes, but she held them back. "Thank you, sir," she said, her voice steady. With her wages in hand and Tucker's letter of recommendation tucked safely away, Rosa made plans to travel to Denver to negotiate with the banker. Zach insisted on going with her, and she was grateful for his company. The trip took 2 days by stage, through mountain passes that were already showing signs of autumn gold. They stayed in separate rooms at the hotel in Denver, mindful of propriety, but spent every available moment together planning their future. The meeting with the banker, a thin man named Clarence Whitmore, was tense. He looked down his nose at Rosa and seemed disinclined to negotiate, but when she placed her $200 on his desk, plus another $300 that Zach contributed, Whitmore's expression changed. "This is still $500 total," Whitmore said. "The property is worth more than that." "The property is worth exactly what my father paid for it," Rosa said firmly. "And you have already made money from the foreclosure. $500 cash is a fair offer." They haggled for an hour, but in the end, Whitmore agreed. The homestead was Rosa's again, and she walked out of the bank with the deed in her trembling hands. On the street outside, Zach picked her up and spun her around, both of them laughing with joy and relief. "You did it," he said. "You got your land back. We did it," Rosa corrected. "I could not have done this without you, Zach. The money you contributed is an investment in our future," Zach said firmly. That is, if you will have me. Rosa Remington, I know we have only known each other a few months, and I know this is fast, but I cannot imagine my life without you in it. Will you marry me? Rosa felt tears streaming down her face, but she was smiling so hard her cheeks hurt. Yes, yes, 1,000 times yes. They were married in our Ray 3 weeks later, in a small ceremony at the church with just a few witnesses. Rosa wore a simple blue dress, and Zach wore his best suit. When the preacher pronounced them husband and wife, Zach kissed her with a tenderness that made her heart soar. The homestead was in rough shape after sitting empty for months, but they threw themselves into the work of restoration. Zach brought his knowledge of ranching and horses, and Rosa contributed her understanding of the land and crops. They worked from dawn to dusk, repairing the house, mending fences, planting a kitchen garden for next spring. In November, Rosa traveled to Kansas to bring Timothy home. Her brother, now 13, was tall and gangly and so happy to see her that he cried. When she introduced him to Zach, Timothy was shy at first, but Zach's patient kindness soon won him over. The first winter was hard, as all mountain winters were. Snow piled high against the house, and the temperature dropped far below zero. But they had stocked plenty of food, and the little house was warm and cozy. Rosa taught Timothy his letters by lamplight while Zach carved wooden toys. They played cards and told stories and built a life together. In the spring, Zach used the last of his savings to buy 6 mares and a good stallion, starting the horse breeding operation he had always dreamed of. Rosa planted crops and chickens and expanded the kitchen garden. Timothy proved to have a natural way with the horses, and Zach began training him in earnest. The years that followed were not easy, but they were good. The ranch grew slowly but steadily. Zach's horses became known throughout the region for their quality, and Rosa's vegetables won prizes at the county fair. Timothy grew into a fine young man, eventually starting his own homestead in the next valley over. 5 years after their wedding, Rosa gave birth to their first child, a boy they named Jacob. He was followed 2 years later by a daughter, Clara, and 3 years after that by another son, Samuel. The little house expanded with each addition, and the sound of children's laughter filled the valley. On their 10th anniversary, Zach and Rosa stood on the porch of their home, watching the sun set over the mountains. The children were in bed, Timothy was visiting with his wife and new baby, and the ranch was thriving. "You ever regret it?" Rosa asked, leaning against Zach's solid warmth. "Giving up the ranch hand life, settling down?" "Not for a single second," Zach said, wrapping his arms around her. "This life with you is everything I ever wanted and more than I ever dreamed possible." "I still cannot believe you knew by the second day," Rosa said with a soft laugh. "All my careful planning and you saw through me immediately." "I saw you," Zach corrected. "Not through you, but the real you, the brave, determined, beautiful woman hiding under that hat, and I fell in love with her on sight." Rosa turned in his arms, reaching up to touch his face. Silver was starting to show at his temples now, and fine lines crinkled around his eyes, but to her he was as handsome as the day they met. "I love you, Zachariah Vance, more than words can say. And I love you, Rosa Vance, my partner, my wife, my heart." They kissed as the stars began to emerge in the darkening sky, and in the distance, one of Zach's horses whinnied softly. The mountains stood eternal around them, witnesses to their love and their life. Timothy visited often with his growing family, and the ranch became a gathering place for friends and neighbors. Rosa never forgot those hard early days, the fear and desperation that had driven her to disguise herself as a man. But she also never forgot the gift that desperation had given her, the chance to meet Zach, to fall in love, to build this beautiful life. As the years turned into decades, The ranch prospered. Jacob took over the horse breeding operation, showing the same natural talent his father had. Clara married a teacher from town and taught in the local school. Samuel became a veterinarian, the first in the family to attend university, though he returned to Ouray to practice. Zach and Rosa grew old together, their love deepening with each passing year. They sat on their porch in the evenings, holding hands and watching their grandchildren play in the yard, where Rosa had once worked herself to exhaustion trying to save her family's land. On a warm summer evening in 1922, 40 years after that fateful cattle drive, Rosa and Zach celebrated their anniversary surrounded by their children, grandchildren, and even a few great-grandchildren. Someone had brought a camera, and they posed for a family photograph, Zach standing tall and proud with Rosa at his side. "Tell us the story again," one of the youngest grandchildren begged, "about how Grandma pretended to be a cowboy." Rosa and Zach exchanged a glance, their eyes twinkling with shared memories. And Rosa began the tale, as she had told it so many times before, about the summer she kept a braid tucked under her hat, and the cowboy who knew her secret by day 2 and said nothing, and how that silence had changed both their lives forever. The end of the story was always the same, and they lived happily ever after, Rosa would say, squeezing Zach's hand. Because sometimes the greatest adventures lead us exactly where we are meant to be. When Zach passed away peacefully in his sleep at the age of 89, Rosa grieved but did not break. She had loved him for 62 years, and she carried that love with her through the remaining years of her life. She spent her days surrounded by family, telling stories to the younger generations, and tending the gardens she had planted decades ago. On her own last day, at the age of 87, Rosa sat on the porch watching the sunset paint the mountains in shades of gold and purple. Her children and grandchildren were gathered around her, and she felt nothing but peace and gratitude. "I have had a good life," she told them, her voice soft but clear. "I have loved deeply and been loved in return. I have seen my children grow strong and my grandchildren flourish. I have no regrets." That night, Rosa passed quietly in her sleep, and those who had known her said she went with a smile on her face, dreaming perhaps of a tall cowboy with storm-gray eyes who had seen past her disguise to the woman underneath. They buried her beside Zach on the hill overlooking the ranch, under the aspens that turned gold every autumn. The headstone was simple. Rosa Vance, beloved wife, mother, grandmother, she lived with courage and loved with all her heart. But the real monument to Rosa's life was not the stone marker. It was the thriving ranch that spread across the valley, the horses that bore her family's brand, the children and grandchildren who carried forward her legacy of determination and love. It was the story, passed down through generations, of the woman who dared to be more than the world expected, and the man who loved her for it. The little homestead that Rosa had fought so hard to reclaim became a family legacy, passed down through the generations. Jacob's son ran it, then his grandson after him. The house was expanded and modernized over the years, but they kept the original structure, the 4 rooms that Rosa and Zach had restored with their own hands. In the barn, they displayed Zach's first saddle and Rosa's weathered hat, the one she had worn during that summer of disguise. Visitors to the ranch would hear the story and marvel at the courage it took, at the love that blossomed in such unlikely circumstances. And sometimes, on clear summer evenings when the mountains turned purple in the twilight, people swore they could see 2 figures standing on the hill by the graves, hand in hand, looking out over the land they had built together. Just a trick of the light, most said, but the family knew better. They knew that some loves are so strong, They transcend even death itself. The story of Rosa and Zach became part of the history of our ray, told alongside tales of miners and mountain men and other pioneers who had carved lives from the rugged Colorado wilderness. School children learned about Rosa Remington Vance, the woman who disguised herself as a cowboy and won back her family's land. Historians wrote papers analyzing the gender roles of the Old West and the women who defied them, but at its heart, it was a simple story. A story of desperation and courage, of secrets and trust, of two souls who found each other against all odds and built something beautiful together. It was a story of love, in all its messy, complicated, glorious reality. And it was a story with a happy ending, the kind that Rosa had dared to dream of during those long, frightening nights in the bunkhouse, when she lay awake wondering if her gamble would pay off or destroy her. It had paid off beyond her wildest dreams, giving her not just the land she sought, but a partner, a family, and a love that lasted a lifetime. The ranch still stands today, over a century after Rosa first walked through its gates with a braid tucked under her hat. The mountains still tower over the valley, eternal and unchanging. And the story lives on, a testament to the power of courage, the strength of love, and the truth that sometimes the best things in life come from the risks we dare to take. Rosa and Zach's great-great-grandchildren run the ranch now, raising horses just as Zach did all those years ago. They keep the old traditions alive while building new ones, honoring the past while looking toward the future. And every year on the anniversary of Rosa and Zach's wedding, the whole family gathers at the ranch for a celebration. They tell the story again, making sure the youngest generation knows where they came from and the courage it took to build this legacy. They raise a toast to Rosa and Zach, to the love that started with a secret kept and a silence maintained, to the partnership that turned a struggling homestead into a thriving ranch. And somewhere, perhaps in whatever lies beyond this life, Rosa and Zach smile and hold each other close, grateful that their love story continues to inspire, to encourage, to remind people that true love sees past disguises and pretense to the heart underneath. It was a love story for the ages, born in the Wild West, but transcending time and place. It was the story of how a desperate woman and a perceptive man found each other in the mountains of Colorado, and how their love built a legacy that would endure for generations. And it all began with a braid tucked under a hat, a cowboy who knew by day two, and the choice he made to say nothing but to wait, to watch, and eventually, to love with everything he had. That choice, that moment of silence and patience, changed two lives and created something that would echo through the years, a testament to the transformative power of love given freely and received with gratitude. This was their story, and it was complete. A circle closed, a journey finished, a love celebrated and remembered and passed down through the generations as proof that even in the hardest times, in the most unlikely circumstances, love can bloom and flourish and create something beautiful that lasts far beyond one lifetime. The end.